Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. So glad that you all could be here. A few housekeeping things. So if you need captions, the Zoom AI captions are available. Just click the CC or closed caption button in your menu bar. Also, as a reminder, when you signed up, you agreed to the ASHE Events Code of Conduct, which I'll share in the chat. Ideally, we won't need it, but in case anything happens, we do have it available. My name is Jason Guilbeau. I use he and him pronouns. I am the executive director of ASHE and joining you today from the lands of the Chitimacha here in southern Louisiana. I will be your staff person in the room today, so if you need anything technology related or have any questions, feel free to message me. Do want to encourage folks to introduce themselves in the chat. Tell us your name, where you're joining us from, what you do, your research interest, whatever you feel like sharing, just to kind of know who is in the room today. As we get started, I want to thank Ascendium for their partnership in hosting this webinar and the National Student Clearinghouse for their partnership in hosting this webinar as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Drew Curtis with Ascendium to share a few remarks.
Thanks so much, Jason, and thanks everyone for being here. My name is Drew Curtis. I'm a Senior Learning and Impact Officer here at Ascendium. For those of you that might not know, Ascendium is a national funder focused on supporting low-income learners to succeed in post-secondary education and workforce training as a path to upward mobility. I personally am very pleased to represent Ascendium's Planning, Learning, and Impact Division, which has the privilege of supporting research aligned with that mission to increase upward mobility for low-income learners. I'll stop short of going deep into our strategic priorities, but you can all find them at ascendiumphilanthropy.org if you're interested. We're very grateful to partner with both NSC as well as Dr. Hillman for the work they do to drive our field forward. At Ascendium, our learning and impact grant makers, including myself, continuously receive and support research proposals which rely on NSC's timely student-level data. And we're grateful to work with Dr. Holsapple and he and his team lead research to develop innovative measures of learner socioeconomic status. And as rural learners are one of our focus populations at Ascendium, we're glad to partner with Dr. Hillman on his research, which helps us answer some fundamental questions about post-secondary access and outcomes for rural communities. I'm personally very much looking forward to today's conversation. And with that said, I'll turn it back to my colleagues at NSC.
I'll make sure I'm unmuted. Great, thank you, Drew. And I'm gonna share my screen. We have a slideshow deck that we're gonna use, but so I will share my screen. And as I'm doing that again, just introduce myself. My name is Matthew Holsapple. I'm the Senior Director of Research at the National Student Clearinghouse, which means, among other things, I manage our research center, which produces the research publications that you are probably most familiar with if you're familiar with research coming out of the NSC, though definitely not the only research that we do. Sorry, I beg my pardon for a moment. There we go. Trying to do two different things at once, and I was not doing either of them effectively. So let me share my screen and start the slideshow, and then I will continue. So, like I said, Matthew Holsapple, the Senior Director of Research in the National Student Clearinghouse, and we're really thrilled with my colleague, Dr. Zhewei Gregory, who is our Managing Director of Research, Development, and Philanthropy, who will introduce herself, I'm sure. But I want to just really thank all of you for your interest in the work the National Student Clearinghouse is doing for the way to support data, research, and insights in higher education. I want to start by talking a little bit about the National Student Clearinghouse. You may be familiar with some parts of what we do, but a little bit about the National Student Clearinghouse and kind of the data that we are fortunate enough to be able to steward for the field. So we were founded in 1993, and some people may not realize, really founded to support student loan compliance for grantors and colleges and universities themselves as a way to verify student enrollment and for loan servicing. And then over the course of our history, we've added different components and services that we're able to provide to the field. Things like we've started taking in degrees and transcripts as well for that. Today, we think of ourselves as a national data utility. So across the clearinghouse, we take in, store, and provide data for the field in ways that supports institutions, states, and other partners through basically the way we think of as trusted data exchange, verification, and reporting. This includes other kinds of data services that you may be familiar with, such as our student tracker data, our PDP, our post-secondary data program, and others that help support colleges and universities, high schools, and other educational organizations as they serve learners. I mean, the important thing reason I want to kind of share all that is the important thing about the clearinghouse is none of our data are collected for research. Kind of earlier in the clearinghouse history, our leaders recognized that because we were collecting all this data, we had this resource that could be used for research and insights in the field. But all the data we collect are for other reasons, and we're just simply able to use some pieces of those data, far from all of them, but some pieces of that to provide research and insights to the field, starting with our research center, which I represent, and now later into our strategic research partnerships and custom research that my colleague Zhewei will talk about as well. The data that the clearinghouse do have, however, I would say is really unique to the field and is what makes it particularly powerful for research and insights. So at the clearinghouse, we collect data on enrollment and degree completion at more than 97% of enrolled students throughout higher education in the United States. And that represents, again, more than 97% of colleges and universities as well. So we think of our data as the most comprehensive data really in the field. Our data also are timely. So we get submissions of enrollment close to real time. So we are able to provide data and insights faster than other kinds of data sources out there. For example, iPads, there's often a year or two lag. Whereas because our data are close to real time, we're able to provide those insights quickly. Our data are student level. So we are able, unlike any other kind of large data repositories, we are able to follow students between institutions and between states. So unlike, say, some of the state longitudinal data sets or institutions' own data, we can track those students as they move through the higher education ecosystem. And then finally, our data are administrative. They come from institutional records, not self-reports. So we're able to provide that with that level of kind of clarity and precision that self-report doesn't provide. So with those four things into account, we really think of the clearinghouse data as unique in the field to provide data of record and also provide insights that are not really possible with any other individual data set. Now we do, as you might imagine, though, whereas as researchers, we're all researchers on this call, we would love to be able to just kind of go hog wild in the data. And when I started at the clearinghouse, that was one of the things I was thinking that would be really exciting. But of course, we follow a lot of permissible data rules. And I would say at the clearinghouse, basically our most important thing and our most important consideration is student privacy and institutional privacy. So we are very careful to never allow any individuals or institutions to be identified in our data, with some small exceptions that we may be able to talk about. But we follow all FERPA and all state laws, as well as what are often some fairly conservative legal arrangements with our data providers, those colleges and universities and other data providers, just to make sure that we are being as strong of a partner we can in terms of data privacy and protecting students and other learners. So that's a little bit about the data that we have and the data we have. And now we'll want to talk a little bit about how we use those data, like I said, for research and to provide insights to the field. So I'm going to hand things over to Zhewei Gregory to take it from there.
Thank you, Matt. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Zhewei Gregory, and I serve as the Managing Director of Research, Development, and Philanthropy at the National Student Clearinghouse. I lead our strategic research partnerships and philanthropy efforts, working very closely with foundations, research organizations, and higher education leaders to turn our national student data into insights that can inform policy, practice, and innovation. I'm very delighted to be a part of today's conversation. So when we think about what clearinghouse datasets enable. It really spans the full student life cycle. And Matt, if you could turn to the next slide, please. Researchers use clearinghouse data to study enrollment, progression, retention, completion, and such topics. And we also see very strong demand for work on mobility and transfer pathways, especially because we can follow students across institutions and across state lines. More broadly, most work with our data shares a few very common characteristics. It is longitudinal, following cohorts over time. It relies on disaggregation, for example, by program, by population, or geography, to make insights actionable. And increasingly, it focuses on system-level question, not just what's happening at a single institution. So naturally, the next question becomes, how do researchers actually engage with the clearinghouse to do this work? Next slide, please. We typically support the field in three main ways. First, through the research center, which produces national reports that help the field understand key trends in enrollment pathways and completion. Second, through strategic research partnerships. These are co-designed, often grant-funded collaborations where we work very closely with our partners to answer specific research questions and generate actionable insights. And third, through custom research, which is a research service line that provides tailored analysis for institutions, systems, or organizations on things like cohort tracking, benchmarking, or program evaluation. Together, these pathways offer flexibility depending on the type of question and the level of collaboration. Now that I've outlined how researchers can engage with the clearinghouse, I'll turn it back to Matt to show how this work comes to life through our core research outputs and publications.
Thank you, Zhewei. And as we've mentioned, I think probably for a lot of people maybe on this call, but a lot of people in the field, where they are most familiar with research from the clearinghouse are from our research center publication series that we do. So the research center has been producing research reports and data insights for more than 15 years. We have a team of, besides myself, a team of 9 analysts who are working nonstop on using our data to provide these reports and these insights. And they really take a couple of different formats. So our main, I think maybe our largest report where people look to us is our clearinghouse enrollment insights reports. This is a series of 3 reports a year that we provide: a November preliminary look at fall enrollment, and then final looks at both fall and spring term enrollments across higher education. These Clearinghouse Enrollment Insights provide information on trends in enrollment by different student populations, different types of institutions, as well as major and field of study and other kinds of disaggregations. I tend to think of this as the sort of data of record of enrollment trends in the field, and I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with these. We most recently published our spring enrollment insights earlier this month, so if you haven't seen that, I recommend taking a look and see how spring enrollment has progressed. We also have, as you see also on this page, we have a series of what I think of as our outcome studies, where we will they're more cohort-based, and we look at a cohort of students that we track their outcomes in different ways over the course of their time. This includes our tracking transfer report, which looks at students who start and transfer from community colleges, as well as our yearly progress and completion report, which looks at, again, making sense, progress and completion of students throughout their time through and hopefully to a degree. We also have our undergraduate degree earners report, which is maybe my favorite, which looks at cohorts of degree completers each year, their pathways to that degree, as well as kind of their makeup and the fields that we're seeing new degrees go into. There are other reports that we put out on a regular basis, including our high school benchmarks report and others that I would point people to as well. In addition to those regular reports that we put out each year, we do have some kind of extended research portfolio where we look to bring in other kinds of value to the field, hopefully outside those core annual publications. I'll note we have 2 new reports coming out this fall that we're very excited about. The first is our time to degree. For the first time in 10 years, the Research Center is going to be looking at how long it takes students to achieve a credential or degree as they move through, and how that varies across different student types, pathway types, and other ways of variation. We're thinking of this as a baseline research report that will then serve as a foundation for a new periodic report on time to degree. We are also, and I'm very excited that Drew's on our call where we can talk about this, and we'll say a little bit more about this in a moment, but we're going to have a national report where national study on students from low-income communities, looking at things like composition, pathways, and outcomes for those students who come from those communities, and really looking at ways to elevate their success and understand their pathways more. And then we also have a set of periodic reports I won't go deep into, but I will note our sub-college no credential report, which looks specifically at students who have been in college but have not earned degrees. That is one that we see a lot of people looking at, paying attention, maybe of potential interest to folks on this call. The other thing I just want to make a note of, particularly with some support from Ascendium, specifically, we are able to have a focus over the next couple of years on looking at kind of the work of students from low-income communities. As I said, we have recently developed a measure, a sort of an income measure proxy that we're able to have in our data, the first time for a data set of this size to be able to have that kind of income data. So we're able to look at the students from low-income communities. And like I said, we'll have a research report coming on them, as well as some methodological research that will be coming out, and some more deeper insights in partnership with our post-secondary data partnership all over the next year and a half or so. So we're really excited to be sharing that kind of work as we move into the future. And then I'll hand things back over to Zhewei to talk about our other research initiatives.
Thank you, Matt. So very exciting projects and initiatives Matt is leading, and we're very grateful for Ascendium's foundation support to many of these research initiatives. So now let me briefly expand on the research partnership side and custom research. Strategic research partnerships are truly collaborative. We work with partners to define the research agenda, shape the methodology, oftentimes disseminate findings jointly with our partners. These projects frequently involve multiple organizations and bring together different perspectives and strengths. On the other hand, custom research is more targeted. It focuses on delivering specific analysis or datasets to support decision-making for an individual client or organization, whether that's cohort tracking or benchmarking or program evaluation. But in both cases, the goal is the same: to turn trusted national scale data into insights that can inform policy and practice. With that, I will hand it to Dr. Nick Hillman to move us into a real-world example of how these partnerships come to life. Nick.
Thank you, Zhewei, and thank you for the opportunity to share this work and just to share some of the experiences and some of the learning that I've had the benefit to go through, and I'm excited to share with others on this work that is a partnership with the Clearinghouse. I am Nick Hillman. I'm a professor starting in the fall at Indiana University, and I have 3 slides here that will kind of give an overview of something about geography and kind of how I've been working and thinking about geography for a while, The second slide is sort of like a quick story about how things came to be. I think this for researchers is always fascinating. Like, how do you move from point A to point B with thinking of an idea and then implementing it? So I want to share that story briefly. And then the third slide will be basically the kinds of research questions that our team and I will be able to answer over the next several years, thanks to a grant from the Institute for Education Sciences at U.S. Department of Education, and also from the support of Ascendium. And so Matt is driving this slide, so we'll go on to the next one, please. And so for the past probably 10 years or so, I've been doing research on geography of opportunity. I've been very curious about this for personal reasons, but also intellectual reasons. Just a missing piece of the college access and college success puzzle oftentimes is place. And I feel like it's hiding in plain sight. We're very much shaped by our surrounding geography or by our opportunities that are around us. So Matt, on the next slide, it shows, or on the next bullet here, just that simple point is how place shapes opportunity, not just in education, but in health, in social well-being, in employment, in a number of important areas of our lives. And so that is a piece of literature that in the education, especially the higher education research space, we engage with, we talk about, but it's just such a deep pool of research that really allows higher ed researchers to engage in a whole new way of thinking around college access and success. And so for the next slide, this is some of the work, or I'm sorry, the next point here, Matt, is that when we want to try to understand and also address educational inequality, we, I think, benefit greatly from having this geographic lens. And so some of the work that I and colleagues have been doing over the last several years have really looked closely at just where are colleges located relative to where people live, how much does it cost, or how long does it take to get between college and home, and what are the other constraints that help us understand maybe the barriers that could be addressed when it comes to college access. And I think just one more point here, Matt. Oh, I think this is a double one. So maybe hit one more. We'll see a map here. Thank you. And so the way that I've framed a lot of this work myself over the years, and I've changed my thinking around this, stems from this notion of education deserts. I just would pause for a moment that some of the critiques of this is that, deserts is a sort of could be seen as like a, what's lacking, what's not in a place. And instead of thinking of that as a deficit framework, think about the assets that are in these places. What is around us, what educational institutions are available to people in certain places. But when you map out the United States, you see just pockets all over the place where there are either no public broad access colleges whatsoever, or there might just be one. And in fact, a lot of people apply to only one college, and that's, I think, okay in many respects. And I feel like it's just important to talk about that more and really put place central to our questions in higher ed research. And we can benefit greatly, I think, from doing so. Notice on this slide, and this is going to help us think about the next one, that these are not states. And when you look at that map, these borders are not states and they're not counties. There's something in between. They're called commuting zones. And so these are kind of clusters of counties that hang together to sort of represent a local place. And I think one of the big elephants in the room is we talk about geography, how do we want to measure it? And so in the work that I've been doing, but also people all across social sciences have really been turning to the commuting zones, this map of the borders here that we're looking at, to help us understand just sort of a typical local area for folks. Not always exact, but it's something. So the next slide will be more of a story. I'll try to go through briefly here to give a little bit of background for the research that I've been able to be part of and I really have enjoyed. So, I mentioned that I've been doing research on geography for probably 10 years or so, and maybe it's now 3 years. I went back to my emails and had to really pull this up and be like, when was that meeting at the research center? In spring of 2023, Ascendium was convening a group of researchers, both in the Clearinghouse team and sort of users of Clearinghouse data and folks who have been interested in both geography, but also income. And how do we think about social mobility and this effort that Matt and Zhewei had mentioned about neighborhood income research, I think at least has some stem or some root into this spring 2023 technical advisory panel. I know the Clearinghouse has been exploring some of the possibilities here on how to measure students' income based off of where they live. And it makes a lot of sense to do that because place shapes a lot of things about our opportunities, including our incomes. And so understanding at a really local level, because of how segregated the United States is, if we understand something about somebody's neighborhood, there's a good chance that that can tell us something about their opportunity structures and the individual's experience in their local area. And so in spring of 2023, the researchers, we got together, we thought through these ideas. I learned a lot about the potential, but what I was really drawn to was the clearinghouse's data. And like what Matt had said earlier, it's you don't know, as a researcher from the outside kind of looking in, a long-time listener, first-time caller kind of thing, I just didn't realize what all could be done. And so in that meeting, I walked away not just thinking about income and income proxies, but also about rurality, because some of my research has been around, again, education deserts and rural college access. And so the research I around, well, knows something about students' geography before they get to college and can measure that in a pretty systematic way, might we be able to then measure, for example, how many students from rural places go to college and their trajectories through college? And the Clearinghouse has been reporting on this for years. And this, I think, allows for like an extension of some of this research to really dig deeply. And so some colleagues at MDRC, an evaluation firm out of New York, they had reached out simultaneously about looking into this proposal for IES, the Institute for Education Sciences, National Research Center for Higher Education Research, and or I'm sorry, for rural higher education research. And since 2002, that center has always focused on K through 12 education. And so this is the first time that we put in a proposal, said, what if we did something on higher ed? And IES funded it. They really were enthusiastic about the center. And so we won that award. And now I'm a co-PI with folks at MDRC. And part of that center, they said, well, what ideas, what do we want to study? And I thought back to that spring of 2023 meeting and said, what if we could study something in partnership with the Clearinghouse on rural college access? And so, around the same time in fall 2024, Ascendium, folks at Ascendium had been in touch and reached out as follow-up from that spring 2023 meeting, but also I was keeping them informed about this MDRC IES proposal. And long story short, they were like, this is the kind of work that we also want to support to both extend that work and just see what all we can do here. And so in this next slide, the final one here for me, outlines those two different projects. So there's one set of research questions that comes from the IES work, the National Rural Higher Education Research Center, and then there's one set of questions that come from kind of the complementary extension of that work that Ascendium is supporting. And buckle up, I'm not going to go through all the details here, but this is going to be really technical, and I hope that it doesn't get too detailed because that might not be useful for right now, but please do follow up in the Q&A if there are any items here that we can talk more about. But what we're able to do on our research team is kind of step back and think about what are the questions that are answerable with the data that Clearinghouse potentially could partner with us on. And so we got to thinking, what if we could tie people's addresses to their census tracts, their U.S. Census Bureau census tracts. And this is what the neighborhood income research had already been working on. And how might we then also tie that in with some education data from the U.S. Department of Education around where school district boundaries are? And maybe we could find out for every school district what percentage of students go to college and complete college. And how does that vary by the student's rurality? And so those are the kinds of questions that we're able to answer through our partnership with the Clearinghouse. And these are really baseline questions that are, I think, really important to monitor and continue to refine and improve upon over time. Because if we have a good baseline, then we can really go even further with our extensions of that work. That's a brief overview of what we're doing with the IES project, measuring college access for students who are from rural high school districts, what percentage go to college and complete college. But then we are also extending that work through our work with Ascendium by asking questions about colleges themselves and what proportion of colleges' first-year students, for example, come from those rural school districts. And we're using clearinghouse data tied back to the U.S. Department of Education data to be able to answer those questions. And to be clear, the U.S. Department of Education data is all publicly available. Same with the Census Bureau. And so we're able to link with the support of the analysts and the research team in the clearinghouse some data to answer those questions. And then the final one here is this last question here is to what extent do rural college students return to rural places after they leave college? And this one I'm really excited about because it's new to use clearinghouse data, but it's even newer for me to link data from the clearinghouse with consumer credit panels. So consumer credit companies, for example, Equifax or Experian or TransUnion, have the capabilities of merging data with the clearinghouse to then be able to follow up with students and see where do they live at different points in time, or at least where is their home addresses at different points in time in the future. But I would love to share even more, but I wanted to at least briefly give kind of the so what context around geography of opportunity, how and why that matters, a brief story about kind of how this project or these projects have come to be, and then here just some details about the kinds of data sources and merging of data sources and the researchable questions that we can then start to answer in partnership with not just the clearinghouse, but the federal government and even these consumer credit companies. And so with that, I'm handing it, I think now to Jason.
Yep. Thanks so much, everybody. This has been really great. We have quite a bit of time for Q&A. So if folks have questions, feel free to raise your hand or you can drop it in the chat and I will ask it of the panel for you. But where I'll start is Matt, I know we talked a little bit about kind of where the clearinghouse is going and kind of a shameless plug, but you have a link for me to share that I'll drop in the chat for folks. And if you just kind of want to share what you're looking for in this feedback form from folks. Oh, Matt, you're muted.
So yeah, thanks, Jason. Just really, again, thank you all for being here. Really excited. And we thought while we have interested researchers that are here at the Clearinghouse, we're always looking to the field to help guide us and help us understand what the most pressing questions that you all have and the most important areas for insights that you all have. So in the form that Jason has dropped in the chat is just a way that you can, we're asking if you can provide us with some of your thoughts and some of your expertise on, as you look over the next few years, what do you see as the most important pressing questions, the most important pathways to investigate or other ways that we might be able to put our data to use to help the field. So really appreciative of anyone who is able to, do that after we're done here. And we'd be really, really thrilled to share that expertise with you. And there's also a spot in that form to provide contact information if you're willing for us to potentially follow up with you for some further conversation.
That's great. Thanks so much. And if folks, again, have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your Zoom hands and I can call on you and you can come off of mute. But as folks are kind of pulling together questions, one of the questions that I've been thinking of as you have been presenting is kind of thinking through what data is available, how the data is used, but kind of talking through the process about engaging with the clearinghouse for data and research needs that folks have. So kind of what does that process look like?
Thank you for the great question, Jason. And that's one we are really excited about. So there are three primary ways and for researchers to engage with the clearinghouse, really depending on their research goals, right? So first, through our research center that provides publicly available national reports and insights that researchers often use as a starting point. And second, also where we see a lot of opportunity is through the strategic research partnerships. And these are co-designed collaborations, and oftentimes they can be grant funded. And we work with the researchers and organizations to help them to further shape and refine their research questions, and we co-design the approach and then generate actionable insights. And we can, talk more details through some follow-up communication. And then third approach is through custom research, which is a service at the clearinghouse, and that involves more tailored analysis. And oftentimes it goes through a design and SOW process with our team, and kind of to cover topics like cohort tracking, some benchmarking, program evaluation, or whatever specific needs and specific research questions our clients have. So for those who are interested, we typically start with a conversation, scoping conversation, understanding the research questions, assessing, the feasibility within our data availability and our governance framework, and then identifying the best way forward.
That's great. And Annalise has a question in the chat, wondering what level of granularity of enrollment is available to researchers. Specifically, does NSC capture course transcripts?
And I can take that one. So in terms of course transcripts, unfortunately, we're not able to use course transcripts for research purposes. We do get transcripts. We have a transcript service from some institutions, but part of the legal contracts on that is that they're not used for research. And part of the reason I think there is that they, once you get into the finer granularity, it can become, even if you're stripping PII away, it can become a lot easier to potentially identify students. And so that's one of the reasons that we don't use those transcripts. I think in terms of granularity, what we use primarily is we have kind of some term-by-term enrollment data for students that can include not transcripts, but program of study, level of program. So credential level, is it a certificate in welding? Is it an associate's in biology? Is it a bachelor's degree in engineering, et cetera, through graduate education as well. So we can have that program level data, but not transcript level data. I think the other thing I would say, Nick, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to share an example, but Matt, please keep going. I'll come back to it.
The other thing I was just going to share is when we talk about granularity, and since I mentioned PII, that one thing I said was that we, student privacy is our guiding light, and so Zhewei and her teams can work with different folks about availability of getting certain level, but we may not be able to provide student level data. We may have to work with you about appropriate aggregations or ways that the data can be in usable forms, though that still don't protect that student level data. So I just want to make sure that was clear for folks, that we can't just hand over, I'm sure everyone knows, but just to really clarify, we can't hand over PII or necessarily student level data depending on permissions that folks have. So Nick, I'll go ahead.
Oh, that's a perfect segue. That's a perfect clarification, because this is the kind of stuff, you don't know what you don't know. And so as a researcher coming in, I just kind of assumed, just, hand it all over. Of course, that's not how that works. And so I just wanted to share one example. And I see, Cassidy, I hope I'm not embarrassing you by calling you out here, but Cassidy worked with us on the Clearinghouse team to help us think through aggregation and to actually aggregate data. Remember, we're looking at rural places for one of our research questions, one of our studies here. And once you start to get to rural places, now you're talking about small sample sizes, small n, privacy concerns just sort of exponentially rise. And so we figured out a way to still answer our research questions and get data that was granular enough for us to do so. And so our example for one of our studies with the Rural Higher Ed Research Center is that our unit of analysis, so our rows in our data, in our files, our rows are anonymized school districts that aggregate up to the school district level. And so our unit of analysis is a school district, not an individual student for that particular example.
Other questions from folks? All right, from Aaron in the chat. Hey, Aaron, I'm wondering if there any of the panelists could share other strong example of projects and or research opportunities that focus on student populations that aren't routinely or ever flagged by IHEs, for example, incarcerated students.
I can give one example, and other folks might have others, but one example is that before I was at the clearinghouse, but a few years ago, we worked with some different organizations with an interest in student veterans. And so we were able, because those partners had lists of student veterans, we were able to match our records with those student veterans lists. Again, not to share individual level data, but be able to do that matching to be able to understand what students do after they receive GI Bill support. And so where students are spending their GI funding and what kind of pathways they're taking with GI funding. And so I think because the organizations we're working with, Student Veterans of America was one of those organizations, if people are familiar with them, as well as some other organizations, because they were able to identify those students. We don't have a veteran flag in our data. We have but because they were able to help identify those students, we were able to then take that subpopulation and really expand there. So, I think, Aaron, I know you work a lot with research on incarcerated students and formerly incarcerated students. And so, that could be a model that could help them. I don't know if there are other examples people want to share of that. Yeah. And I'll just say, I think that is part of where the power of the partnerships come from, is that, there are a lot of things that are not in the clearinghouse data as it lives, but if we can combine with other data sets, and we're working internally on, different ways that we can do that combining. But I think that is where a lot of the power can come from to, one of the things that I often say is in a lot of kind of studies, we can help with the outcomes. Like we often have the outcomes based on our data, but then combining that with other kinds of data, whether it's student populations or other, K-12 pathway data or anything like that, that often is where a lot of the power comes from.
Thanks, Matt. I'll pause again for a second for any other questions, and perhaps while folks are thinking, again, just a reminder about the survey in the chat from the clearinghouse folks, if folks could take a few minutes to complete that, but also kind of putting the survey back on you all as you think about where the field is, the data from the clearinghouse that's available. What are some of the big topics that come to mind for you all, and how do you think the data that the clearinghouse has can help address those topics?
I don't want to always jump in first. I want to give space for Zhewei or Nick to jump in. Zhewei, did you want to jump in first?
No, go ahead, Matt, and then I'll follow up on yours.
Some of the people here know me, and they know I always have some things to say. But I would say, like I said, we're always kind of looking to the field to help us determine what is important. And I will say some of the things we are hearing around. So there's a real focus we're hearing from folks on kind of non-degree credentials. So think of those certificate programs that have really grown in popularity and are providing students with and learners with different and shorter career-focused pathways. So that is an area that we've been thinking a lot about and how we can help support those insights around those. I think there are a lot of questions in the field around labor market outcomes, which is something that the clearinghouse, that we are consistently hearing from institutions that they are trying to understand those data. Nick mentioned it in his research as well. That's something that, again, at the clearinghouse, we are trying to work on ways that we can be supportive of that. That's all kind of in process. I think from our perspective at the research center too, there are questions around kind of rurality that we're excited to explore ways that we can help support. Nick has shown one way, but I think in our own work and showing trends in the field, and I would say along with that, the kind of What I want to call it the complicated pathways that a lot of students take. So a lot of the work, the way we look at work right now, is fairly linear. This is a kind of, I think, an issue a lot of researchers have, right? It's harder. It's hard in the data to look at and summarize those really complex pathways that a lot of students are working on. And I would say that is another thing I'd like us to be able to understand better. I could go on and on and on, but I'll stop and Zhewei, if you want to have anything else you want to jump in on.
Well, thanks, Matt. So just to piggyback on Matt's comments there, so the education to workforce linkage, from credential degree to labor market outcomes, that's a really big trend and focus or future research direction for us. We're looking at ways to connect the education credentials data to the labor market outcome data. And along that topic, and how can we combine and connect the field of study data, program level data with earnings to identify the pathways, to study the pathways. And how can we, as Clearinghouse continues to expand and enrich its data collection, how can we better leverage some of the course level data through our specific products and some, in the future, potentially some industry credentials data. But of course, that's not our current core data coverage, and that's something the Clearinghouse continues to expand on.
And I maybe just go back to one of the early points I made, whereas we don't collect any data just for research, right? And so we look for ways that we can use those data to be useful for our main partners are participating colleges and universities, and so ways that those data can be useful for them are the real priority for us, and then we hope that there are research avenues as well for that.
I would add the importance and the significance of the clearinghouse is just even more so now because of the federal data landscape, and so that's a big elephant in the room as well. That this is sort of federal surveys and the federal data ecosystem is really broken right now, and so I think that researchers have some opportunities to look at new places. And I would add, in addition to everything in terms of these potential research ideas, I love all of them. And I would also say anything around student loan repayment and student loan outcomes and connecting those with enrollment and completion data, I think is really, really rich and promising too.
All right, a few more questions from the chat. So, from Bethany, can you speak a little to your partnership with Nash to connect your data to labor market data?
I could briefly speak to it. I'm not the project lead on that one, but has been involved on the philanthropic side. So NASH, the National Association of System Heads, joint initiative with the Clearinghouse. It's a joint research partnership that focuses on improving the further understanding of transfer pathways and student mobility at the system level. So this initiative, it's a joint research effort between the two organizations by combining the Clearinghouse National Longitudinal Student Data and the labor market outcome data, which is provided at the aggregate level, provided by Census Bureau. And then NASH, their role is to work with the institutions within their network and the system leadership networks, and also provide qualitative insights. So that is the kind of the brief highlight of the initiative. And the main focus of this initiative is really the transfer pathways, efficiency, and system level practice and policy improvements through the combined strengthened data sets.
And it looks like we have one final question. Can doctoral students doing research, or maybe another one came in, can doctoral students doing research access your data without cost? What is your process to work with the data?
And Matt, please chime in. Happy to speak briefly about it. So we understand, the cost can be prohibitive for some of the researchers, especially if you're a doctoral student and you don't really have the resource. And we do have the cost of the value and the cost of our data and also our systems, right? And the cost of our labor. But however, we are a mission-driven organization. Our mission is to support and enable researchers in the field to do very meaningful research work. Currently, we don't have direct programs that directly engage with doctoral students if they cannot secure funding themselves. But I think it is a possibility for us to, partner with certain foundations to sponsor some, maybe fellowship programs or doctoral student programs to support such kind of researchers to provide them data access. So that is a maybe a future consideration.
All right, and another question from Leanne. I'm working on some financial aid studies in Washington and thinking about the broader potential of NSC data for place-based research. Could we link NSC data to track our county level cost and labor market data to test whether enrollment, intensity, persistence, completion response to aid reforms vary by local cost of living?
At first glance, I would say it sounds like it. I think that as I think about the different components to that they're, again, like we've said, taking into account what we would need to do to protect student privacy, and there may be some aggregations there, like Nick mentioned. I think this is exactly the kind of thing that our data would fit well into. And I think one of the ways that we are able to think about place-based research is we do have census tract identification for most of our students in our data, not all, but most, and some other. Yes, so short answer is I think yes. Though of course always the devil's in the details, which I think is important to remember, and that through the kind of follow-up intake conversation with Zhewei's team. Sorry, I'm speaking for your team, Zhewei. I shouldn't be doing that, but I was reading the question and getting excited about the possibilities of it.
Absolutely, and Lenny, I think, who asked the question, feel free to follow up with us. Our email addresses are on the in the deck, and we can drop the emails in the chat as well for you to easily grab. And we would love to follow up and have conversations with you all.
Awesome. Well, thank you all to our panelists for being here today at the Clearinghouse. Thank you to our colleagues at Ascendium for their support of this research and of the association. Please be sure to give Matt some feedback on the link in the survey. And if anyone has any questions, we can stick around for a little bit. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel later today. It'll also be included in the ASHE listserv tomorrow for members. Otherwise, just thank you all for being here today, sharing some time with us. And again, thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Drew.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone, for joining us.